I'd highly recommend viewing this episode on YouTube rather than as an audio podcast because there are many visual examples presented. Hello and welcome to the Color Mentor podcast. My name is Paul Hanrahan. I'm a colorist, originally from South Africa. Now I'm based in Taiwan. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to people who have mentored and inspired me on my color grading journey over the years. So welcome to the show. If you'd like to learn more about color grading, you can head over to my Patreon. It's called Color Mentor at patreon.com, and it includes basic skill training all the way up to full coursework on various topics. I also offer one-on-one mentoring for those who want to refine their craft further. But without further ado, let's get on with the show. This is the first of a two-part discussion that I had with Richard Muller. He's a digital imaging technician based in Germany now, but like me, he's also from South Africa originally. He's worked on some amazing shows like Chappie, Dark, Tribes of Europa, 1899, The Avengers, and more recently, he's worked on the Phoenician Scheme as a virtual studio supervisor. We discussed the role of the DIT and what it involves. We also discussed some of the testing he's been doing for film and video acquisition in combination with virtual studios. We also discussed the various quirks from different countries regarding the role of the DIT on set. Okay, hi there, Richard. I was so glad to have you on the Color Mentor podcast. This is part of my mission. I mean, I think, especially with what's going on in South Africa and the development, societal development that's going on there, this bridging between colorists and DITs, which I think should have happened long ago. But I see that it's starting to happen, so I'm very excited to have this chat and see how we can further forge those connections between, I guess, onset and post, right?
I mean, like you say it's starting to happen. I mean, maybe it's starting to happen in SA more, but I think it's been happening overseas in larger markets for a very long time. So,
right.
Especially as I work more in the UK and in other places, it's very much a case of that it's kind of well established there.
Well, what was your trajectory from solely working in South Africa to bridging now overseas? I mean, did it just happen gradually, job by job, or did you make a move at some point?
I got very lucky. It wasn't really an intentional move, nearly as much as I happened to work with a German DP on a production in South Africa, and I work with lots of international DPs in South Africa. And I think that's actually probably one of the biggest strengths any of the South African technicians and crews have, is that because we're a service destination and we cater for such a wide variety of different productions. We've got crews coming in from America, we have crews coming in from the UK, we have crews coming in from all over Europe, not just for features, but for commercials and quite a wide range of budgetary levels.
Yeah.
We have Bollywood productions every now and then. We have South American productions coming in.
I mean, what was the big stuff, other than the usual features and commercials that gone, but in terms of episodic, was it stuff like Black Sails happening in Cape Town? Was that a big like step change in things going on?
I mean, so I didn't really do Cape Town that much. I was based in Joburg.
Right.
And Joburg had, when I was there, had a very sort of would get a certain budget level and certain type of show. Like the bigger commercials and the bigger shows were definitely destined for Cape Town. And I was getting lucky because things that did shoot in Joburg, like Chappie and Avengers, I was the guy there for it. And for the most part, even my competitors at the time were colleagues. A lot of us would go into the same shows as like Second Unit and Splinter Unit, because there were fewer of us in Joburg, and
right. A big show could absorb all of you into one.
Well,
yeah,
a few of us. Yeah, and the same thing happened with big commercials. Like I would, if a big commercial happened and I needed a second unit or an additional person, I'd bring in my closest competitors for it.
Right.
Because who else are you going to bring in? I mean, that was right back in, like, as far back as 2008, 2009, 10, 11, sort of 12. I teamed up with Peter Nielsen around 2012, 2013, and we started the company together. And it was actually, I think, that team up and having and establishing a sort of like a formal connection with other DITs and having a DIT service company that really created a platform to also take a jump onto bigger productions, because it wasn't just a freelancer on my own now. It was a company with a support structure. If I was on a job that I couldn't handle on my own, it was recognized very quickly by production companies that it wasn't just me on my own. There was an entire support structure there. If I needed a data wrangler to come in as support on a job that had too many cameras for me on my own, there was there. It was like, it became very quickly, it became an established sort of idea.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that the way you talk about jobs is you're often taking a higher level approach. You're like, yeah, you're having that company approach to say, okay, what does this whole job need? What does first unit need? What does second unit need? And it really is a team of people, which I find this approach quite refreshing.
Yeah, for the large part, like I was reading a lot of blogs. I was reading a lot of like everything from blogs, Facebook groups, articles written by people overseas. And this is what the international guys had already done. 4K London was around at the time. I loved the idea of what they were doing, which was they were acting like a little bit of an agency for crew. I mean, we all had crew agents at the time in South Africa,
Right.
but this was focused totally on DIT stuff. They'd provide the equipment, they provide the post workflow, and they kind of set a bit of a standard for London. And like there were other competitors as well. But I think a lot of our early stuff we tried to model on what like international companies were doing in terms of saying, right, well, like we have set packages, we have, you're getting the right equipment for a red job, you're getting the right equipment for an Alexa job, you're getting the right equipment for a RAW versus ProRes job, and they just kind of tried to standardize things a little bit so that producers knew what to expect as well.
Yeah, I mean, those are the important links.
And I think that was a pretty big jump for us because, as I said, like the moment it was a company, suddenly a greater range of projects was open to us.
Your start in the industry, were you in the film days? Is that where you came in first, or you were pretty much when things were transitioning to digital?
I mean, my first projects were all film projects, but as like a video assistant and a PA. But the first projects were all film projects, and my first camera assisting projects were kind of along the same lines. But I was like very entry level. Like I never even beyond like sort of small student productions, I never even got to load film, like nothing professional.
Right.
And I transitioned into digital productions as a camera assistant and a lighting assistant sort of very quickly and very early. So I did a lot of music videos as like a spark and eventually as a gaffer, but I mean low budget gaffer, and then a lot of cam assisting work. And the only times that I'd really work on film were student productions or small independent productions. I was very lucky enough. I was really lucky 1 year, 2005, 2006 to get to help light a short film by Q and Tran when she was kind of building her portfolio. I mean, now she's doing amazing stuff like she was the DP most recently for Ashoka,
right,
for Disney. Amazing to work with her because of where she was in her the way she worked as a young international DP. And I got sucked into post around about 2006, 2007, spent about 2 years working sort of like training up as an online editor and doing a bit of coloring work. I think it's where I first met you as well.
Right.
And I think that especially that period as an online editor and an assistant in post-production was really important because we saw the transition from film to digital and post. And I spent a lot of time fixing stuff that went wrong on set in that transition period.
Yeah, one of the things people were asking me questions recently about, like lighting for HDR and lighting for SDR, what are the differences? And it made me remember the period when what you're talking about now is transition from film to digital. And there were these kind of rules of thumb, which were getting fed back to Onset from post to saying, okay, lower your lighting ratios because the digital formats at that stage they didn't have the dynamic range. So that was kind of the rule of thumb. Okay, low lighting ratios, digital needs, all the help it can get. And obviously it's actually the same thing when going to HDR. You can't have you think you've got all this range, but you actually have to have detail in all those ranges. Hence, lower your ratios.
And control your highlights and ND down your practical lamps and use dulling spray and things like that. Which
Right.
HDR reintroduced a whole bunch of old film techniques very quickly on set, much to the joy of sort of a lot of people who liked doing that stuff in the first place,
NDs on windows and all that good stuff.
especially on lamps, like cutting little curved pieces of ND to slide in front of all your practical lamps in front of the bulbs, and then spin them around when you change direction in the hallway.
This is great that you've had that experience. I mean, because it all. I often say that colorists are well positioned to do a lot of roles, if they want to be VFX supervisors later, because they have to understand so much. But I think DRT is even more so, and especially that you've had editing experience and all this other stuff, lighting experience. It's a grand perspective of the whole thing.
I mean, I was never a very good editor, but I kind of did well as an online editor, because there it very much was a case of reorganizing material, fixing like badly organized material, the number of untitled -1 MOV files in a bin that I had to sort through and rename and recategorize. And I had some really tricky projects, and I think the advantage there was also I started getting like a small reputation for being able to fix tricky projects. So I remember working on a documentary, The Craddock 4, which had been through 3 different post facilities by the time I got my hands on it. So it had an edit in France, and then it had another edit somewhere else. And I had to go back and start recapturing from HD cam tape all of the material, because of essentially none of it had actually been captured properly, or the original stuff had been lost, and now there were only proxies of proxies of proxies, and stuff that had been exported and then recut, and then you had to find the original material with absolutely no time code reference, absolutely no tape naming references, and a lot of it like by eye. So it took weeks to rebuild this project from scratch. It taught me a hell of a lot at the same time. I think I went straight from that project onto one of my first big DIT jobs.
So you were super organized.
And hit the ground running on the DIT job, basically going, yeah, we're not going to make any of those mistakes.
Right.
And it really established a sort of a solid methodology. And those early DIT jobs were predominantly data management. Every now and then I'd have a sort of combination job, because I'd be working on something like a Sony 750 or 950 and need to be the person who understood how to read the waveform monitor for the DP.
Right.
Like I spent a lot of free time researching and going into gear houses and learning camera menus, and like the camera assistant side never left. It never stopped, even though I was working in post a lot. When I stopped working in post, and the main reason I stopped working in post is I just hated sitting in the same room every day.
Right.
I'm not built for it. Going back onto set and doing what I'd been doing in post essentially, but now having to do it for digital cameras, because the switch happened really quickly as well. It was like South Africa was shooting almost entirely film. The next year it was half film. The year after that was all digital. Like it happened really, really quickly. And so the demand for people who understood how to handle the material coming off the cameras, how to get it to post safely without losing anything, and at the same time someone who understood exposure and how exposure worked on these cameras and what you could do to these cameras to get the best results. Because a lot of the stuff was pre-Cineon style log.
Yeah.
You could very easily blow out and clip your material or have noise in the shadows if you didn't know how to set those cameras up properly.
I assume you're talking pre-Red 1. So we're talking, like you mentioned, the 750s, the 950s, those Sonys.
Yeah, pre-2 Red 1 days. I mean, Red 1 was pretty rare initially as well. I think I probably actually worked on Alexa before I worked on a Red. I got very lucky as well in terms of even Alexa work. I was working on D21 and D20 stuff more so than Red stuff initially. I mean, I didn't work on District 9 at all, but District 9 was a special case because those cameras were deliberately pushed and given to the production, and we didn't really see in SA much release of those cameras until a little bit later. because of the budget constraints, we saw a lot of things happening, like very quick transition to Panasonic P2 cameras, to the early Sony HD cams,
Yeah.
and then a lot of like uptake on everything that people could do to try and make them more filmy, these old CCD cameras. So the PNS Technic lens adapters, I can't remember the name of them. There was like a cheaper version than the PNS Technics that let you put 35mm lenses onto 3/4 inch like CCD cameras.
Right. So it was a Sony mount to a PL mount or something like that.
Yeah, they were complex. They were complex devices. It was a PL mount onto whatever like worked for your camera, but predominantly Sony mount. And you often had to have another lens in between it as well. So I think the PNS Technic ones, I'm trying to remember how they worked. But basically, a lot of these adapters had their own ground glass inside them, and then you filmed the ground glass inside the lens. At least that's what the cheaper ones did.
Right.
And those had a lot of uptake. Like there were a lot of productions running on those for again, like the low end sphere, not the high end stuff.
Yeah. Okay. We could spend a whole nother podcast explaining what the hell a ground glass was, but let's not go there. Okay, let me steer the conversation slightly. Is it possible to, at this stage, to clearly summarize the DIT role? Because in my mind, whenever I talk to DIT or whenever I think about the issue myself, it's like, oh, there's another thing that the DIT is probably doing. And then there's this whole list of things that you could possibly be doing. So, is it a constantly evolving role, or do you feel like it's quite settled now? And can you easily define it?
I think you can easily define it. I definitely think it is a semi-constantly evolving role, or at least the roller coaster seems to get wilder and trickier. I thought it would get easier and easier, and as you take on bigger and bigger jobs, the roller coaster gets more crazy, not less. At the very essence of it, I think that the DIT is the guy who had to read the manual. Like you're the person who read the manual,
right?
That's the first line of the job. Like you need to understand how everything you're working with works.
Right.
And the first step is literally reading the manual. I field tons of questions from people that they would know the answers to if they'd read the manual.
Right.
Like tons of questions from SET, from DPs, from other DITs. And every time it's from another DIT, I said, have you read the manual? Because if you had, the answer's on like page 15.
Right. So you need a t-shirt that says RTFM. Okay, but just for people to understand, let me just put in, this is basically just stuff that you've told me, but let's put simple on the one end of the spectrum. So it's literally low budget, digital shoot, one camera. And you may be covering a bunch of roles. On the other end, you've told me recently about shoots that have digital and film cameras and virtual studios. That just, digital and film's one issue, but now you want virtual in that as well. It's just like, wow, this is black hole upon black hole upon black hole of in-depth knowledge there.
Yes. A lot of those things are like, each of those things is a specialization in themselves. Mixing them together is more than a one-man job.
Right. Yeah, it still bends my brain. I suppose, people did back projection on film cameras long ago. Yeah. So you're just doing back projection.
Yeah, absolutely, you are. And the color's a little bit messier. Back projection with a xenon projector is great. Try back projection with a laser projector, and you're going to get some very weird results on film.
No.
And in exactly the same direction as weird results on digital. That was the projecting a bit of white balanced for 3200 as per the Sekonic. Can you take one guess what color that image is going to come out on film? Tungsten balanced stock.
I'm guessing bluey, pinky purple?
Bluey, yeah, bluey green. It's going to come out bluey green. Like how much bluey green it's going to come out for that projector, for that film stock in that environment to get white.
And this was manually tweaking it?
Yeah, that was manually tweaking it. Film especially, but any camera can react to like that CRI light stimulus in a different way. Film has its own particular way of reacting to weird light stimuli. Like you get the same thing on fluorescent bulbs. People who have been dealing with green looking fluorescent bulbs for years.
Yeah, that green spike. Kinoflows had that spike in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, the Kino flows were really carefully built to not be green on purpose. Like they were very, very carefully developed, basically by taking meter readings and the manufacturer recognizing what would overstimulate the film stock, like what that blue spike coming off that laser, much in the same way that LED walls tend to overstimulate the film stock in other ways towards magenta.
Right.
So there's a daylight measurement on row ruby,
Yeah.
for example, and immediately, like if you know what you're looking for, you can kind of guess how the film stock's going to react to this. It starts to overreact to the red, but it also overreacts a little bit to the blue. So you end up with this magenta cast to your content. And it totally depends on how you balance your set. If you were shooting to 6500 and you were balancing all your lights to 6500 and you white balanced your stock to 6500, you'd kind of get a semi-okay result with only a slight amount of needing to tweak. But the moment you take this...
Yeah, putting a wall on 32 seems like a bit of a push.
Well, I mean, this is the problem, is that it is exactly what you need to do. But in order to put the wall on 32, all you're doing is you're cutting the green by a third and you're cutting the blue by 2/3 to get it down to 3200 from this. So you're not reducing the red output at all.
Yeah.
If you're going for just a straightforward 3200. So if you literally go into the wall control and say, right, go to 3200 now, all it's going to do is going to cut the output of the green and the blue here. And now you're really going to overstimulate the film emulsion on the red side,
and lose a couple of stops of exposure in the process.
Well, you lose a potential output on the wall because now the maximum output of the wall itself has been cut, and the potential quality of the wall is being cut.
You're not in the RGB peak now. Your maximum peak. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you do run into a whole bunch of problems like that, and like scientifically and technically, like we can deal with that. You start taking that into, because you're not just the guy who reads the manual, you're also the guy who has to translate the manual for the other non-technical people on set, not just the DP, but producers, the director, sometimes ADs. Yeah. You've got to be able to translate, okay, if we do this, this is what will happen, and this is how much time it's going to cost us.
Yeah, and test, right?
Yeah. And the trouble comes in with a creative thing of saying, like trying to say to the find a way to explain to a DP, right, we can balance the 3200, but what's going to happen is we're going to have to tune the wall for that lighting level. And when you do that on digital, that's quite easy. You see it on a monitor, you can run your tests very quickly.
Yep.
You can recalibrate the wall quite quickly using the camera as a colorimeter. There's several different software options for doing this, depending on which camera you're using. Sony have a great option. RE guys have a great option. There's OpenVPCal as well, which is fairly agnostic. And all of that works, but it works really well because on digital, you see the results instantly and you know when you've made a mistake as well. Yeah. You know when it's not working. With film, you've got a several-hour turnaround. If you're lucky and the lab's in the same town as you and they're not full and they have space for you, they can probably turn it around in 2 or 3 hours. But you've still got a 2 or 3 hour wait to see your results.
If they have a bath, that's going to run. But if it all has to happen at midnight, then you're screwed.
Yeah.
So what is your approach then? It's then you just shoot lots of options, like, cut it by a third, shoot again, cut it by 2/3, shoot again, just bracket options, or
like you don't really have that sort of space or time. I mean, you can do that. I think I probably have a project file here where I have a bunch of said brackets ready to go. I would say that like there is a methodology for this that kind of exists that says, right, this is how you should approach this, and it's going to take this much time.
You get to be the guy sitting there as well. Great.
Well, I mean, a lot of the time you're fighting with production in terms of budget to run these tests in the first place. Yeah. So they're going, right, what do you mean you need to shoot an extra 400 feet of stock in your tests a day before the rest of the camera team arrive? So you do get into this place of going, okay, well, if we're running 6500, we're kind of okay. There's only a slight magenta shift there on the wall. As I said, it's very slight. So we're looking
Yeah.
at 200T film at the moment, by the way,
Yeah.
but with daylight light very specifically. So this color chart, everything in this room is lit at 5600 at the moment.
Yeah.
Quite intentionally, knowing that that's probably where the DOP was going to be.
That's one square of the wall that's been pulled out there, right?
Just one square. Yeah. Just one square of the wall, taken to the gear test, set up, and then I've got me as a human reference and some flowers as some color references, because like you also need a bit of a contrast reference. If you're just looking at the wall, you don't know if the wall is the wrong contrast for the film.
Don't you need the Brompton with you as well, or is it?
Yeah, the Brompton's there. Yeah, the Brompton's there in order to control the. Well, on this case, it's a megapixel.
Right. Okay.
But straight away, we can see that it is just slightly too cool in comparison. It's got a slight magenta shift.
Especially in that skin tone versus skin tone. If you've got skin tone on the wall, you really see it.
Again, straight away, you see that there's a slight magenta shift. It's not terrible. You could probably grade it out quite easily. Yeah. Okay. And then there's what happens if we correct? Now, this is a correction I have, not for 200T for daylight. This is a correction I have for 250D. Because I've done a separate test for 250. So I wanted to see what the 250D result would come out like.
Right.
And the result on white is kind of okay, but all the other colors shift. And that was quite important, knowing already that I have two different 250Ds. Okay.
Yeah.
And the one 250D is for white, and the other 250D is for primaries. Because they're not uniform across. And these corrections are very simple. They're basically just gain-based corrections. They're not LUTs.
Right.
That you apply to
just
the
white
wall.
balance offsets, yeah.
They're white balance offsets that you apply in linear space. They work for that stock fairly well. There's your primaries and there's your white tone correction. So yeah, I do shoot a bunch of brackets. But that's not all you have to do for this sort of thing. You have to go much, much deeper into it. Right. You actually have to start shooting. You have to basically run something like OpenVPCal or another known patch sequence. Right. And you have to analyze the wall properly, and you have to analyze what the lab is doing to your stock properly. Mm-hmm. So that you know that your analysis of the wall is correct. So here's that extra layer of the deep rabbit hole here. Like when you're dealing with an Alexa, you're dealing with a Sony, you have a prescribed uniform color space. The only variance is the sensor itself, and you're calibrating out that sensor against the wall. But log C is log C, and S log is S log. Yep. And you can run color transforms on those color spaces very easily in order to do this analysis.
Yeah, the gamut primaries, the tone curve, it's all specified, yeah.
Whereas with film, there's a guideline, but every lab is slightly different, every scanner is slightly different, and your results are always just slightly different.
Yeah, day to day, week to week.
Lab to lab, and that's without the lab necessarily doing anything intentional, like adding their own secret sauce to the mix.
Yeah, and when you say lab, in this context, we're talking about neg processing plus a scan plus some kind of transfer into some small dailies file.
Correct.
So that's a lot going on.
You got 3 steps before it gets back to you on set.
Yeah.
And then you also have to question, okay, well, do I want the flat scan or do I want the dailies file? Because they're going to be two different things.
Take the flat.
You want the flat, but you also want the daily scan because you need to know exactly what's happening through the entire pipeline. Some labs won't necessarily give you the flat scan without you really pushing them hard for it.
Just pause for a moment there. Just all of that complexity you've just mentioned. And now you put in the let's do a show lat. Like, let's do a creative look on top of all of this. And you're thinking like, wow, okay, how the hell? It just, I mean, I've done this job for years and it's always been tweak it manually to get the client happy. So it seems, sure, there's that level at the end of the day. And that's the trenches that I've been in for 30 years. But to have it on a automated process that works worldwide on a global production where you've got companies all over doing different, VFX here, edit there, and it just, it really throws the can of worms.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is as well is that you're going to get very different results from something like an ARRI scan or a Scanity.
Yeah.
Like they're different scanners. They have a different encoding method. I worked recently with a cinematographer who really preferred the ARRI scan, like the way it looked.
Yeah.
And if you look at the two of them, you can kind of see why. Like we actually ran the test. We had the test side by side, same roll of film, same batch of tests, same sort of images that I showed there. And you could see in the side by side immediately what he liked about the ARRI scan versus the Scanity. It did have a nice quality to it right off the bat.
What was it to do with the MTF as well, the spatial frequency profile as well as the color, or bit of both?
I don't think it's that exact. I think it's more just like the skin tones and how like the feel of the footage right off the bat feels.
Yeah.
And I can understand it from the cinematographer's point of view. Like, it does feel better. It looks nicer straight away. It's kind of also along the same lines of like your stuff looks really nice the moment you throw it into Baselight, just right off the bat.
Yeah.
Like, it just automatically looks nice. They were smart about it. They made it look nice. Like,
right.
And at the same time, on the other side of it, like the Scanity from a purely technical point of view is potentially giving you a hell of a lot more information.
In terms of bit depth, like double exposure scans and 8K downres to 4K and all that good stuff.
I mean, just in terms of like the base sort of like 16-bit linear encoding on it versus 10-bit log encoding. But it feels a little bit more clinical, a little bit edgier, a little bit harder to begin with, slightly less organic.
Well, that's totally in accordance with the rank Sintel telecine feel versus the DTF Spirit feel, which was always a split, and the Spirit always won because there was no grain. It was a diffuse light, not no grain, but much less grain, much less dirt because of the diffuse light source and all that.
So if you look at the two side by side right off the bat, like you can see why the DP is possibly going to pick the ARRI scan. At the same time, a good colorist is going to be able to level that out very, very quickly. Right. So if you first leveled the two out, you might not be in that same place, like that same decision making. And it's kind of like that thing of like working with aces. Like the first time you work with aces, everything you look at, it looks very technically clinical. Like it's maybe a little bit too contrasty. You take your Alexa files into aces and straight away you've lost some of the nice skin tones. Your colors maybe feel a little bit too punchy immediately. And it's because aces is taking it into this color space that gives you a lot to work with, but you've not necessarily lowest common denominated, but you've highest common denominated all of your different cameras together. So you have removed the Alexa skin tones and creaminess and versus like possibly removing the Sony's accuracy to primaries or like whatever it is, you've deliberately dialed those values out when you go into aces, and it doesn't look nice to begin with. You have to work at it to get it back to what you like and what your taste sort of prefers, and then you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, I've been focusing a lot on these so-called clean technical starting points, which are now, on the course I was teaching last week, there was literally like 13 or 14 options of display transform, basically different color management that you can use to go to your display, and I think that really is a bleeding edge. And I'm really interested to see I know what the reaction is going to be, but I won't predict it. I'll let it happen. But as ACES 2.0 hits the streets, what the feedback's going to be.
Well, I mean, I think they're very smart with ACES 2.0. They've learned from the resistance to ACES 1.0, and they've worked hard to make it look nicer.
I mean, they definitely have taken that RRT out and back that contrast off. But I think there's still going to be the same bun fight over, saturated traffic lights and neons and things like that. But yeah, that's a rabbit hole for another day. It's that challenge of custom proprietary versus global standard that everyone can adhere to. It's you've got to pick one and stick with it. But yeah, at least we have these options now. We can choose different things. And we're throwing the umbrella way wide here, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion. I feel that the stage of maturity to HDR, we're now in another phase where the people who don't like it, they grade SDR and put it inside an HDR container. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear your take on how that call it a maturity of approaching HDR, not just cranking things to use the range because it's there.
You do definitely get a lot of that, like the hiding the SDR inside an HDR container. You run into broadcasters and broadcasters who push you in the opposite direction, who actually go, no, why do you not have a white at 1,000? Well, we don't want a white at 1,000 on every single setup and shot. Yeah, no, you need to have black here and white here every shot. Every shot there's got to be something. And weirdly that definitely happened in Germany for a bit with one of the broadcasters. I've heard a lot of DPs complain about it. I haven't been subjected to it on a project I've worked on, but where they really do get pushed to grade to max white and max black for every single setup.
Yeah, it's like the showroom demo mentality.
Yeah, and that's 100% not how HDR was designed to be used. The whole point with HDR, if you go right back to some of the early articles that reference things like Sicario, which has an HDR grade, but you don't necessarily see much above 80 to 100 nits in it, ever. Like blown out windows in the background maybe are a little bit bright, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're actually sitting there right down.
Yeah.
And it's done very, very deliberately to contain that contrast range and make sure that you're paying attention to the actors and not being blinded by a lighting element in the background.
Yeah, it's literally eye candy, eye crack that pulls your attention away.
If you listen to Eric Messerschmidt talking about Mindhunter Season 2, like he talks about it doing exactly that, like where he contains all the inside exposures, very carefully makes sure that, the windows outside are hot, but they're only hot to a certain level. And then you go outside for the first time and now it's really hot. Now he's lifted everything up so that you kind of feel the heat of Florida on these characters. And it becomes a storytelling tool.
I really love that idea of having levels, having gamut ranges. So the outdoor range, the blacks will be lifted, the whites, everything will be up. Then your indoor daytime, but then your nighttime range on HDR is way down in the floor. I think this is really how we have to be using it. I mean, as an example, on a film recently I had, was an HDR finish, and it was just pretty much a dialogue-y type film. So for the first whole, like 70 minutes or so, I didn't take anything over 200 or 300 nits. But the last scene, the whole place burns down. And then I just let it go up to the, where you needed to feel that heat. So yeah, absolutely. Trying to find always a story logic for the use of HDR.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that the DPs I've worked with have been like really eager to embrace that idea of it. Use it in exactly that way. That was the exact brief Nick gave me for 1899. He said he wants everything below a certain range when they're below decks of the ship, and only when they go above the deck of the ship do you start to feel the brightness of the space and the HDR range. But even that gets contained, and only when you hit the desert and these war scenes do you really get hit with like the full intensity of it. And suddenly your brightness level jumps by double the nit range and then back down again.
Your relationship to the DP, and essentially what I've heard now from other DITs, it's almost once the trust is high, once the relationship is built, then it kind of becomes the DIT runs the exposure. And I think that's quite an interesting setup. So what I'm getting to is, let's get a quick list of all the things a DIT could do. And one of the things is basically being not being the DOP's light meter, but you're watching the scopes. You're constantly checking the exposure for them, right? As one critical role.
Yeah, I would say 80% of the DBs I work for, that's definitely part of the job.
Right.
I would say maintaining consistency, not just in like exposure, but in look and throughout the whole pipeline, and not necessarily consistency across the range, but consistency with the intent, consistency with characters, consistency with story, consistency with location, like whatever consistency applies to in this case.
Yeah, lighting ratios and all that kind of stuff.
Lighting ratios, but with a mind for storytelling and a mind for like what you did in this location or what you normally do for this person, or
Right.
what you on film we felt this, we could feel this on the film, but in the digital version it's feeling flatter, so maybe we need more contrast for digital, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So about how whatever you're doing at the time is responding against what you've done before. I think that's a really big part of it. So sometimes, yeah, that involves running iris control and doing light meter readings for the DP. Some DPs I work with, I don't go anywhere near an iris controller. Either the DP's got it in his hand on his camera, and all I'm feeding back to them is, hey, this feels different. Did you mean for it to be?
Yeah.
Versus being directly in control of that. And sometimes, like with Nick, who I've worked with a lot, I think we've got maybe 500 days on set together, if not more. I very rarely need to touch an iris controller for his A camera because he operates a lot himself. But I'll often have iris control for B camera.
Right.
And I'll be matching B camera to A. And I won't necessarily just be matching B's stop to A, but say A camera's on a mid shot and B's on a longer lens, he doesn't necessarily want it shallower. He wants to maintain the same sort of depth of field and the same relationship to character. So it's not just a case of riding, like it's a case of going, okay, well, actually, let's pull an ND on B, or let's pull two NDs from this B camera, and let's give it a deeper stop so that it feels the same as A camera.
Right.
And so it's as much about maintaining exposure as it is about maintaining feeling and intention and like what you're trying to tell with the story and for a character or for a space. And then for a lot of the DPs I work with, I would say this is more so than like exposure control. I'll spend a lot of time with maintaining the look coming back from dailies. So on big projects, it's very rare that I'll run the dailies myself.
Yeah.
Usually dailies will be graded by a proper dailies colorist at a facility. And I will spend a lot of time talking to the dailies colorist and the actual colorist, both in terms of like in the beginning in terms of look development, but throughout the process saying, right, this was the intention with the scene. So here's a reference of what this scene should look like. This is where the DP wants to go with it. You've got more control than I do, so maybe you can open up the shadows a little bit more, but let's not lose the blue in the shadows, and please keep the skin tones warm up until this point.
Right.
So we communicate and we like set up a very close relationship with the dailies colorist, keeping that consistency going throughout the shoot. So I'll get their results back. I'll often lay all of the dailies stills and references that come back onto a timeline. I'll talk to them if the relationship with the DP is close enough. I'll talk to the dailies colorist and say, no, I think that's not what we wanted to do here. We need to make these changes before I even take it to the DP. And then I take the DP, the final, hey, are you happy with this?
Yeah.
This is what's come back from dailies. And that I probably spend more time on than anything else except keeping an eye on the live image and doing live QC while we're recording.
Well, okay, two questions. The first is in what the dailies colorist is doing in that stage of the process. I guess this varies company by company, but are people sticking heavily to CDL only? Or are they going free rein on the full color corrector?
No, I mean, again, it depends on project, it depends on DP, it depends on your deliverable requirements. If you have a VFX heavy shoot, you stick to CDL quite heavily, quite strictly, and simple CDLs as well.
Right.
But I do work with DPs who have absolutely no interest in that. And the only time we limit to CDLs is when it is a VFX shot.
Right.
Because then you're going, hey, hang on. We need to be kind to the VFX guys here because the only way it's going to come out in the same sort of space and be easy for them is if we stick to this.
Yeah.
But no, there are DPs I work with who keyframe every shot in a dailies grade. And it's a hell of a lot of work. And the question is is it the appropriate place to be spending that time?
Yeah, for cuts that may never get used. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For cuts that might not get used. I have DPs who corner pin and correct distortion in the dailies and level ceilings and or reframe, and we'll shoot a 4:3 image and then pan and scan in the dailies. And so you get some pretty complex dailies workflows. that definitely break very far from what those CDL only restrictions allow for.
But yeah, I mean, if that's what makes the shot right, then yeah, you got to do it. Hence, it'll bubble to the surface in the offline process.
Because it's going to be used in the offline edit, because it's going to be seen, and there's a lot of there are two levels of emphasis here. Like the one is, and like production often argues about this because they're like, oh, but it's going to get a grade anyway. Why are we spending the money here? Why do we take the time? Like, why are we spending this time here? And the strongest argument for that is because people get used to it.
Yep.
Because the director gets used to it like that, because the editor gets used to it like that, because the producers or the client get used to it like that. By the time you get to the grade, you're not necessarily allowed to make any more changes. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of DPs have been caught by that, where I've even heard of projects where they didn't have a grade on it, like they worked in log in the offline straight in Rec 709, as people got so used to it that the DP almost wasn't allowed to do what he wanted to do in the final grade.
Exactly. Yep.
And at the same time, a bad LUT or a bad look or an overly strong look can totally ruin what you're able to do in the final grade. Hence why when I do look building, I always try to involve the final colorist in the look building process, because they're the ones who have to work with it. So, and 90% of the time, that means they're the ones who have to build that LUT.
Right, ideally.
They're going to potentially build a much better looking LUT than I can build. I'm like more of a technician than an artist. I can match a look, but they're going to build something that they want to work with in the way they want to work with it. They're going to end up handing me a version of that, and the version they hand me might not be able to carry everything that they want. You can't carry bloom. You can't carry grain in a LUT facet. You can't.
Nothing spatial.
You can't necessarily run the types of secondaries that you want to run in a final grade. And this kind of comes back into that thing of like, what is the show look and the show LUT that does get used in dailies, and how relevant is it for that CDL only workflow? Because some LUTs are pretty destructive.
Right.
So there's got to be quite a close understanding between like those three like members of the team, the colorist, the dailies colorist, and the DIT, about what's happening in that space.
It's a little bit like you're balancing on a thin tightrope. Now, if there's no LUT, you're basically just at the mercy of the camera color management. There's no creative show LUT being added in. And then to make this period piece, or to make this retro 70s show, the art department has to be very careful about what they choose. You know, they have to choose some very things that really look like part of that period piece. So it's almost like the tightrope's very narrow. If you give a show LUT that's taking all those unwanted colors and just squishing them to the right place, it's almost like art department could be more, the tightrope gets wider, and you could put a whole lot of other things in front of camera, and the quote-unquote grade will just fix it. So it's a very interesting balance. You know, I will say it one more time, I'm sure most people know, but the show LUT steers everything in the opposite direction. So a blue show LUT will make you expose more and more and more and more yellow. A dark show LUT will make you overexpose, etc., etc. So that often gets used to good use and bad use. So it's really about understanding and making sure you're making conscious choices about it.
I find I often, like the first pass of the show LUT will tone down massively before we start shooting. So like we'll get the first pass and prep and makeup tests, we'll fiddle with it, but most of the time we tend to tone it down, especially if it's too contrasty, especially if it shifts the exposure, especially if it makes us clip certain colors. Like so there's a bit of a there's definitely a tweaking phase, and again, that's why it's so important to involve the actual colorist.
My second question is to that other point was that when I started in the industry, there was because it was, I was doing dailies, so I was syncing film rush prints to 1/4-inch neg and laying it to Betacam. That Betacam would go to set, and they would watch it on as big a screen as they could every day before they went out to shoot. So it was kind of the studio mentality of dailies viewings, of selected takes and things like that. So I wondered if the process that you were describing, doing these more complex tweaks and this grading pass of dailies for the DP, is somehow bringing back that thing of dailies viewings. I was just curious as how many teams you are finding are actually doing as like a better dailies viewing process, or if it just goes off to editorial and then it's never seen again.
I think it's semi-rare that we get a proper dailies viewing. Like, I've had it on a few productions, and I've had it in the beginning of a few productions where we go back into a cinema space and like a cinema-sized grading room and actually look at it on a big screen every now and then.
Right.
But it doesn't happen often. The time pressure productions are under nowadays often prohibits that sort of thing. Like DPs rarely get time themselves to look at more than a bunch of stills,
Right.
if even watch the entire dailies pass. With the increasing number of 12-day, 13-hour day sets and 5-day, 6-day week cycles and things like that, I think there's not necessarily always a lot of time for that sort of thing. Like the bigger productions sometimes have space for it.
I could imagine for big scenes or for at the beginning, but then once people feel that they've got it, then I'm sure that would be phased out just for cost and time reason.
Yeah. And at the same time, like the DP's chance to reflect on the dailies, like some people find a way to make it happen. There's one DP I work with fairly regularly, and he won't come every day. But when he does come, we sit for an hour or two at wrap or at lunch, and we have lunch together, and productions learn very quickly to make sure that they bring us lunch at either the van or the tent or wherever we're going to review the dailies. And we'll watch 2-3 days worth of dailies together for that hour of lunch or an hour at the end of the day. Not necessarily work on it, just watch and talk about it. And say, all right, here's what's been happening. Here's where we've been going, and that's despite me being live with him on set and like matching 2 cameras and keeping the consistency on set. There's also that review phase, because like when you have that space and time to do it, you suddenly go, hey, hang on, we started here and then we shot somewhere else for 3 days and we came back to what is supposed to be the next scene, and because we've shot outdoors for 3 days, our contrasts have changed. So we've come back inside and now we've drifted slightly from where we began. That's not a bad thing, but does that mean we go back and rework day 1?
Right.
Or do we rework day 4 to match to day 1? Which one are we going to do? Are we going to meet in the middle, or do we go back to how we started?
Yeah, as a post-production process on top.
And with him, we often do. We regrade stuff. Well, I'll go back 2 weeks prior, and then I'll replace all the editorial material from 2 weeks previously if we rework stuff.
Right.
Obviously, that sort of thing has a time implication, has a cost implication for production. So because we know we work that way, we try to prepare everyone for it so that it doesn't necessarily cost extra. So on those shows with him, we don't have a 12-hour or 24-hour turnaround on dailies. We stipulate a 72-hour turnaround on dailies.
Right.
It's allowed by production in that environment because the director's also the editor. Yes, there's an assistant editor prepping stuff for him, but because he's also the editor, he's not really working deeply with that stuff until the shoot finishes. So we have the space and the freedom to do that, and the trust, and it's the trust from the producers, and it's the trust from the director, and it doesn't have that hot studio like we've got to have approval in 12 hours sort of push.
Taking the experiences you've had in Europe and elsewhere, just for smaller countries like where I am in Taiwan and in South Africa, unfortunately, for most productions, the DIT is basically seen as the person who's going to back up the files and do some file copying and some data management. So maybe in terms of what I have roughly on my list here is obviously data management, security, storage, and storage solutions. Maybe monitor calibration on set, that would somehow fall to the DIT. On-set network management. I mean, I realize sets are now Wi-Fi and they're now all online.
Oh, yes.
Which is a whole nother thing that may fall to the DIT. File conversions for editorial, you've already mentioned. Any links to the logging and continuity person, which I wondered, maybe that's something you can speak to. But yeah, good old video playback. I mean, you said that's how you started out, bashing coaxial cables, doing playback on film sets. But yeah, camera settings, we've spoken about, exposure, and then on-set grading. I mean, is there anything else that I haven't listed there that would fall inside the role of the DIT? I
mean, so the video playback thing is an interesting one, because I do tend to run my own playback recording, but I don't run it for anyone else but me, not even necessarily for the DP. Like most of the time, I want the DP to be seeing what the director's seeing. So having a good Q-take operator or a good real-time or like a good PSU operator is having someone on set who is looking after the director and the continuity person at the same time. And it's a pretty full-time job. Like, it's not just a case of running the software and running the kit and running the rigs and running the monitors. It's a case of being able to pay attention to those two people and what they need at all times.
Right.
So that when the director says, I wonder if we're going to need to look back. Hey, can we have a look at that take 3 takes ago? That take is already queued up and playing.
Yeah.
They're just recording the video feed from camera, and they're keeping a very, if they're good, they're keeping a very good catalog and library of that material. So that, and they're listening in, like they'll have monitors with microphones on them, or sometimes the director wears a mic, or they'll have a two-way talkback system on the director's cart or the continuity person's. I often get a feedback from Q-take as well, so that I can see what the director's being shown.
Right.
At any point in time. As I said, it's a full-time job. Like Q-take's like dedicated operator who knows the system, knows the software, builds the library, and has the mental capacity inside the chaos of a film set to always be listening to and looking after the director and making sure the director has what they need at a moment's notice. Whereas I'm doing something very different, especially when I'm doing my own recordings. I'm looking for different things.
Yeah.
From that exposure matching to elements of continuity with camera to errors that shouldn't be there, to someone who's changed a setting that they shouldn't have, to me having bumped something that I shouldn't have, to
A and B camera matching and all that stuff, which you mentioned as well. Yeah.
All of it. And sometimes you'll see something in frame that you're like, hey, that's not quite right. And I'll want to cut and look back at that immediately and look at just that moment to see what was that. Was that a camera error? Was that like a crew member in the background? Was that a reflection in the window? And then I have my own tools to pull the contrast and see exactly what that reflection was. Was it a crew member? Was it a passerby? Was it a piece of equipment? Like little tweaky things like that having your own playback really helps you do, but you can't be tethered to anyone else at the same time with that.
Yeah, so I can see that triangle of playback, continuity, and director. That's kind of one realm. Yeah, I didn't think of it in those terms.
They're looking at performance, and they're looking at things that I often don't have sound. Like, I very rarely listen into the sound as well because I'm so focused on the visual side of it.
Right.
I do when I need to, but for the most part, I'm tuned into a different wavelength.
I don't know if this is from the film era, but I always have this, it's on the data management and sufficient numbers of backups for insurance and all that kind of thing. I always seem to remember that the rule was if you needed, or the requirement coming back from the insurers was that you had to have 3 copies of the media stored at 3 separate locations. I don't know how basically you have a RAID on set, you have the camera cards goes into a RAID, you'd have a second copy, then a third copy going offline. I mean, what is your general data protection approach to this very critical subject?
I would say thank goodness for Netflix, first of all, because if you have a look at the Netflix partner portal,
right,
they've got quite a good breakdown on a whole bunch of workflow rules and methodologies for Netflix productions in general. A lot of that stuff that they've published and put out there like that as a best practice system has come from them looking at all of the productions that did lose stuff versus all the productions that didn't lose stuff. And at the same time, what's been really interesting to see, because like we had this phase in South Africa, like when we first transitioned, I was getting a lot of calls because people had lost data and they were saying, hey, why did this happen? And the gear houses had this list, and the insurance companies had lists of who'd lost data, who hadn't lost data.
Blacklist.
Not really a blacklist, but they kept track of that sort of stuff. It was the same thing as in like loaders who repeatedly scratched film or fogged rolls. And they did, like, they kept track of it, not just who were the technicians, but which production companies would lose data regularly, and what it is, like what were the common factors. And very quickly in South Africa, I think because they did the digital transition very early on, the insurance underwriters picked up on the fact that South Africa wasn't actually losing data so much, at least anymore.
Right.
And the international clients certainly were losing data because they picked up the whole process a little bit later. Like I think the nature of the market right there on the southern tip did push for a quicker transition, and the lower budgets pushed for a quicker transition to digital than necessarily Europe and America necessarily went for. So when these underwriters who service globally saw that we weren't losing data, they got very interested in exactly that. Like, why? What are you guys doing? Like, what's different here? The CPA in South Africa, Commercial Producers Association in South Africa, got together a lot of technicians and said, right, what are the rules? How do we make sure this doesn't happen? And they very early on published a guideline of like, right, it's going to be a bunch of things like, and it was like it was the 3 copy thing. But it wasn't just that. It was rules about like how long you leave a card before you're allowed to back it up, how long you, like what sort of QC are you allowed to do with that card. If you're working with spinning drives, don't store them vertically on a desk where they can get knocked over in a rough production environment. Because, you know, those early Lassies and Western Digitals all stood vertically. So one of the rules was you weren't allowed to have those drives sitting vertically.
Right.
You can't move a drive that's spinning.
Right.
And like those were set up rules inside the CPA guidelines saying if you have to follow these rules, otherwise you're not going to be covered. And the insurance underwriters loved that, and they immediately adopted that sort of stuff. It was an interesting contrast because I remember one meeting where the insurance underwriters went, wait a minute, so what about tapes? We only have 1 tape copy, right? Yeah. And what happens if someone leaves that on the car seat? Well, in the sun, it means you're probably going to warp and stretch the tape. And this moment clicked for them that a lot of their tape-based workflows were far less safe than the digital workflows.
Right.
And the digital workflows, when you followed all the rules, and there was a recognition as well that if you do certain paperwork along with the data backups, simply doing the paperwork forces you to have a good backup.
Right.
You can't do the paperwork if you haven't done the backups correctly.
Right.
So, and it was a very clear telltale sign that if you don't have the paperwork, it's very likely your backup policy is bad in the first place.
Yeah, you have no idea if you're safe or not. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you do have a strict paperwork rule or policy in place, and there's a bit of paperwork missing, you can almost immediately guess that there's a problem with the material.
Yeah.
Every time I've looked at someone's lost something or the editor can't find a shot, or there's almost always a piece of paperwork missing that says, hey, well, we actually have no idea what happened here. But if the paperwork's missing, then like the likelihood that footage is missing just goes right through the roof.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the underwriters' requirements, not just insurance requirements, but it's like I advise DITs to always, who are fighting with production against unsafe working stuff, is my advice to them is ask for the underwriters' requirements, not just the insurers' requirements. Ask for the actual underwriters' requirements. And it's been really nice. I've quite a few times recently basically received a copy and paste printout of the Netflix partner portal.
Right.
Workflow.
Use this.
Use this. So the underwriters have recognized that it works. So, yeah.
Right.
So coming right back to it, thank goodness for Netflix, because I think they really did lay down the rules, and like much in the same way that the BBC guidelines, like there was a long time where the Discovery or BBC guidelines was kind of a standard for post-production. I remember like back when I was doing online editing, they had rules for deliverables and rules for handling of tapes, and rules for framing and rules for time code. And I think Netflix have basically taken that over, and most companies now follow a version of their rules as the baseline.
Right. Personally, I think this is the skeptical side of me coming out here, but I think for all that good stuff that Netflix has done, they also there's going to be an interesting phase now, because they're under pressure now to become profitable. So I think there's a lot of automation, a lot of optimization, a lot of kind of cutting corners, to put it bluntly. And I'm interested to see how all of that plays out. But yeah, hats off to them for the ingenuity and the research, things like OpenVPCal that essentially came out of their stable. You mentioned Q-Take and things like VFX shoots where you're shooting plates on day one, you're shooting green screen on day two, and you need live compositing and all that kind of thing. Ideally, that's a separate operator. That is an editor on set or a professional Q-Take operator to do that. But would that ever fall to the DIT or like playback on a video wall and things like that?
I mean, that sort of stuff comes up often, and like it's incredibly market related. For example, in Germany, I think there's a very strong push from production side to get rid of DITs wherever possible.
Wow. Okay.
There are a lot of productions here that don't run with the DIT at all. Cards go straight to post-production, and there is no DIT on set. So a lot of the DIT responsibilities, because DPs and camera crews aren't necessarily willing to give up that safety net, immediately fall to the Q-Take operators. So the idea of checking the camera settings for A and B camera, I've seen Q-Take operators who've been lashed by camera department because they haven't noticed that A camera and B camera are at a different stop.
Right.
And I feel very sorry for the Q-Take operators because they're
kind of busy.
Looking after a director, looking after director and DP, looking after director and continuity and art department and producers is really a full-time job. Trying to also service the camera department at the speed the camera department needs to be serviced is a tall ask for them. So there is this point where it's just too much work for one person in that sort of environment. And I would say the trend in Germany is to push the Q-Take operators really hard to do as much of the DIT's job as possible. Like, for some reason in the producer's mindsets, it's perfectly okay to pay the Q-Take operator extra as long as they avoid having the DIT.
You mentioned other examples about how it differs country to country. And I'm really interested if these are like a Venn diagram of what the camera assistant does, what the DIT does, what the Q-Take, and they would shift between each country.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, at the same time, most of the DITs I know in Germany tend to therefore be more along the lines of on-set dailies colorists. And there, when insurance says, no, sorry, you can't send the cards to post, you have to back them up on set and check them on set. And it's often an insurance requirement or a production preference more than anything else. If the DP is strong enough to fight for it, then the DOP says, okay, no, hang on, I do work with the DIT. And I've been lucky, the DPs I work with tend to make that argument. They say, sorry, I want Richard and I want to work this way.
Right.
And we work more along the lines of the UK/American, like a hybrid of the UK and American sort of method. Some producers just don't understand it, and they don't want to do it. And when they see it, they go, oh, okay, I see why it's different, but I still prefer not to spend the money.
Right.
And I think we've even run into a broadcaster who just turned around, even though the producer had made space in the budget, the broadcaster just took a red line and went, nope, not spending money there. You can put that money somewhere else.
Crazy. Well, that's cultural. It's history. There's probably some reason, some event, some trend, some, like the way things transitioned, the way the loader became the DIT or something in the past, that caused that.
And I mean, I would say it's very easy here to send your cards to post-production and have them back the material up. Like, you're not necessarily worried that the car's going to be hijacked on the way to the post-production. Yeah. Or that anything particularly bad is going to happen to those cards in the half an hour to an hour it takes to get there. And very much like you had to drive the film to the lab.
I mean, it seems crazy, seems absolutely crazy that you'd actually risk that journey of the only one copy.
And at the same time, you do get these international productions where the underwriters go, nope, sorry, that material gets backed up on set and checked on set as quickly as possible. And even then, in that scenario, I'm not necessarily going to be the person doing those backups on set and checking them on set as quickly as possible, because for a lot of those DPs, that's not what they want me doing. They don't want me QCing material they've shot already. They want me QCing the material we're about to shoot. If not, that we're shooting.
So, it just becomes whether there's the acceptance whether the DP has championed needing you as this link to post-production, this constant eyes on everything. Yeah, and how that all those roles, how the pie gets sliced.
I mean, a lot of the time, like a really good argument that someone used was basically if I save them 5 minutes of setup, by the end of the day, I've potentially saved an hour of overtime.
Right.
And if I've saved an hour of overtime on a shoot that's running at €130 a minute, I have paid for myself several times over.
Right.
That's kind of like the mindset you have to work towards. And I think that's the mindset you need to work towards in almost any part of the workflow, whatever you're doing. Like, is this saving time and money somewhere else later? So like when you're doing this dailies grading and when you're doing this like level of detail up front, is it going to save time in the final grade? What are you doing to make sure that this is useful for the colorist and post-production all the way down the line, and it has an element of saving time? So if keeping the cameras consistent on set and matching exposures and matching white balances, or making sure that you don't have weird shifts so that the colorist isn't sitting there for 2 days extra doing a technical grade just to line everything up. If you can get consistency in the material across the board, it's less work later and there's more space and time for creative work.
Like reality shows like Big Brother. Not that they would have a DIT, but yeah, I mean that's the perfect example. Literally, because there is no time for a grade.
That's actually like a fairly good point. A lot of these shoots, like these big reality shoots, especially the ones that run through vision mixers and things like that, will have
vision control.
I can't remember. There's a specific name for the technician who sits there on these cameras and has like live control of 6 to 8 cameras at once.
Yeah, vision mixer.
Football matches, live concerts. I worked on a Roger Waters concert 2 years ago, and it was great to see it because we had like 27 Venuses running in RAW on set. Every 6 cameras was had, because they were fibered into the cameras, they had direct control of white balance and gain, as well as stop. If they didn't have direct control of stop, they were at least talking to the focus pullers, the camera assistants, and saying, hey, I need you to open up or close down from here. But their control panels on the Venuses basically give them a joystick for each finger, and they can sit there and control white balance and gain and a whole bunch of other like smaller features with one finger on each controller. So they can match 6 cameras to each other, and it's going directly back into the camera so that by the time, so both in the ISO recording that they're making and in the raw material, so it's not a CDL layer, it's like right there in the metadata for the camera, all those cameras match to begin with already. Right.
I mean, you might get some tweaks on the run, but still, it's in...
If they're tweaking it frame by frame. That level of control is great because, yeah, exactly, they don't have time to sit there and grade and fix all of that material from scratch when they hit their final post pipeline. So it better be as closely matched and lined up. And on top of that, it has to line up for the screens and for the playback that they're doing and for the broadcast that they might be running and things like that. And it was almost like watching a fine-tuned live grade DIT on steroids, because I don't know many live grade rigs that could cope with that. You'd almost have to adopt that vision mixer environment to deal with 27
TV
cameras.
Station mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, and you break it up. You give one person 6 cameras, you give the next person the other 6 cameras, and you put them all on the same side of the room. Or
the OB unit, the OB truck.
They're fast. They grade. They were grading and matching those cameras way faster than I ever would. So
I wanted to ask you about acceptance of the DIT, and I think you've spoken about that in different markets. What are the main pain points and misconceptions that you think currently exist around the job? Obviously, it's we don't need that extra crew member if it's something they've never used before. But anything else?
You definitely have. You definitely have a lot of productions that view the DIT as a grudge purchase. I think that's all over the place, everywhere you go. I get calls from other countries I've worked in who almost deliberately limit what their DITs are allowed to do because they don't want them growing and becoming more expensive.
Set a precedent.
And set a precedent. And then you end up having a call saying, hey, can you come back and work in this country So because none of our guys can do the job. And well, you guys can't do the job because you didn't let them. Like you deliberately don't.
Yeah,
So,
you're not building.
and you do get a few places like that, and it's unfortunate. And at the same time, it's definitely one of the departments that in a lot of the world doesn't get trainees easily. Like you often have a trainee in the camera department. You often have a trainee in like either the video department and grips and lighting, and you get trainees, and you get film funds that support trainees. And whether it's South Africa or Germany, like I fight to get trainees. And if you don't have trainees, you're not training new people. Like you're not bringing people up in the industry. So it's not just the assistant, it's having fresh new people. And because I think the thing is that DIT for a lot of people is a stopping point. That stopping point is also different depending on different markets in different countries. Like Germany, DITs often go on to become colorists and post-production people, whereas in America, a lot of DITs go on to become DPs.
Yeah.
And I think in the UK and like South Africa, a lot of DITs go on to become post-production supervisors and VFX supervisors. And it's different everywhere you go. And the nature of that market too, like I'm very lucky. I get to work very closely with DPs and directors. I get to listen to DPs and directors talking to each other. I get to have conversations about storytelling and lensing and lighting, and that I wouldn't get to have if I was the guy in the van.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily get to have if I was the camera assistant, because the camera assistant has their hands full on something very mechanical and very technical and requires a lot of focus. So it's this space that's this amazing learning environment. But that's me, and that's me being lucky with the people I'm working with that I have that. And I think there's a deliberate intention to that. Yeah.
Yeah, the teams have actually the producers or DPs that actually see the value in it. They've actually championed. They've insisted on you being there. That's the way the change happens. And in terms of, just in terms of language, it was quite interesting there. How do you see the DIT as part of the camera department?
Most of the time, yes, I do see the DIT as part of the camera department. I've had camera departments who do not see the DIT as part of the camera department.
They see them as part of what? Post?
Post. And then, of course, on in terms of production side of things, DIT, like at least in Germany, the DIT is part of the camera budget.
Right.
And dailies is part of post budget. And in German productions, local productions, often you have a separate post and a separate onset budget, sometimes with the production manager looking after one and the post supervisor looking after the other. And never the two shall cross.
And basically, you're getting sliced in half, yeah.
You're getting sliced in half. So dailies definitely happens in post because it's part of post's budget. It's part of what's been prescribed by the line producer or the broadcaster. And so there is absolutely no space for anything beyond X. And anywhere the DP has to find money for you, even if he saves money in post later, anywhere he has to find money for you in onset has to come from the onset budget.
Right.
And that means taking money away from lighting or taking money away from art department or taking money away from, rather than acknowledging that there's a saving in post-production.
It's like trying to sell the benefit of having the show LUT.
Yeah.
Like, why do the tests? Why make the show LUT? What effect will it have? Is it a tangible effect? Like on the surface level? No. We're just shooting. But if you get it all focused on what we're shooting, how we're feeling about it, the mood of the actors, and then what the editor feels like when they get the footage. Does it look shit? Does it look great?
How confident does the director feel?
Exactly.
How confident do the producers feel? Like, I mean, confidence of production, confidence of producers is a large part of where a lot of this effort goes into.
Well, movie making is all speculation at the end of the day, right? It's a big game of trust, and everyone's hopping on the snowball as it rolls down the hill. So let's talk about the color pipeline collaboration. What do you see in the ideal world where there's lots of budget? What do you see as the ideal collaboration? How far does your collaboration extend? Is it also talking to art department? Is it, within that, call it broadly the look design process?
You have to talk to everyone. You have to talk to makeup.
Yeah.
You have to have a close relationship with makeup. I like to make friends with the lead makeup artist on a production very early on. It has multiple benefits. First of all, they often go shout at the AD for you and say, hey, I need the DIT closer to set so I can look at their monitor, which is the best monitor on set.
Right.
And suddenly the ADs are making space for you that they weren't willing to make space before in the arrangement and layout of the set. Like otherwise you get tucked around the corner 2 buildings away, according to the ADs. And at the same time, there's so many things in terms of like what camera's doing filter-wise that can impact makeup, and what makeup is doing that can impact in terms of how light is coming off and bouncing off certain actors.
Right.
Like the wrong makeup on the wrong actor, it can be disastrous for lighting. It can look great to the eye in the makeup room, but and I mean sometimes this is a collaborate, like how much the DP is talking to the makeup artist, and like a lot of the DPs will talk very closely with the head of makeup and the head of costume and put a lot of effort into making sure that they're lighting the costumes that in a way that does the costume and the story justice at the same time.
Yeah. And you're talking color and texture in terms of the makeup.
Yeah.
Like, does it feel too thick?
Color,
does it feel
text,
pasty?
Absolutely. Or does the polarizer change the way the makeup reflects? Or is there something about the makeup that doesn't react well with this particular type of filter?
Under this light or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you have to have a basic understanding of like certain types of makeup are going to do certain things. If you're mattifying someone's skin, it's not going to be reflective. So if you have lots of back and side lighting and lighting of color, or you're lighting people of color, you don't necessarily want to like mattify and get rid of all the shine. You actually want to enhance it potentially for that lighting setup, for that environment. Like, so different actors require different treatments, both on the lighting and the makeup side of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get tunnel vision on set. Like a DP will focus on the lighting and getting the right levels and getting the right, and they have a large team to run. So if you have a good relationship and you say, hey, hang on, like, let me go chat to makeup and see what they're doing, like it can work out quite well. Some DPs like to have me around to keep makeup out of their hair. So
right.
Yeah.
You're blocking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then you throw HDR into that mix, and it's a whole, it's a redo. Or as you mentioned on that job you had recently, what looks good on film doesn't look good on digital, and vice versa.
Absolutely. Yeah, we immediately saw that there was a massive difference because we were lucky enough to shoot for 2 or 3 days of film with the Alexa side by side, but not for the Alexa, and then switch to Alexa for the last 3 days. And suddenly, in that switch to Alexa the last 3 days, after you've got the results from the lab back, going, oh, hang on, like, why are we struggling to get contrast here? What's going on? Is it just our lighting? Or is the camera reacting to the makeup differently?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, how you bridge any of that without serious, wardrobe and makeup tests, I have no idea.
Yeah, and on a commercial, you don't necessarily have serious wardrobe and makeup tests. On like features, like at least, yes, on big features, you get a lot of time for wardrobe and makeup tests. And a lot of those tests go into your look building. Like often you don't actually start with real look building until you have a full wardrobe test with a full art department, like backdrops and color palettes and things like that. There's no point to simply pointing a camera in a gear check bay to a simple lighting setup and trying to build the light from that. You need to have the costumes. You need to have the color palettes of the sets in place. I mean, for example, you asked about dark in one of your questions, saying about how did we get to that look. And I mean, that look is massively lighting and art department and location.
Right. Yeah.
And lighting being an element of both art department and location in that regard. It's not just the lensing and the camera and the grade. The grade's actually a really small part of it in that regard. Like that color palette and art department and art direction is really fine-tuned and exact.
Yeah, you're there as well, and the grade is just a little nudge on top.
Every wallpaper, every painted set, every location we went to, every piece of costume is all part of a plan.
Right.
And then on top of that, you have this cold, wintry light in the first season.
Right.
And lots of haze. And to be honest, I think if we took that show light and I applied that show light on a set in South Africa, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have the dark look at all.
Totally different ratios. Yep.
Absolutely. I would say that you couldn't even apply the same look in summer in Germany and get the same results. Daniele from Filmlight has this great talk he does at a lot of the festivals and seminars and events that happen about look building. Inside his Baselight timeline for his look building package, he has a bunch of examples of stuff that DPs he's worked with have shot. So there's a clip that's recognizable of a makeup test from Tribes of Europa. There's a clip that's recognizable. He's got a shot from Chappie that he uses, which I'm quite proud of. That's still in there 10 to 12, 14 years later in his look building demo. He's got color palettes from other productions and DPs that I recognize as well. And all of that sort of stuff is really important in terms of the look building, that you have every element in relation to the look that you're going to be building. And then you also have some other references ready to go of what would happen if we put it in another environment. It looks great on this shot. What happens if we go outside into a green forest? What happens if we go into a room with blue walls? What happens if we go... And suddenly you can start to see where your look or LUT might break apart. Like I've had LUTs that add tons of noise and patchiness to the blue tones.
Right.
Coming back from colorists, for example.
Yeah.
They look great in a white room. They look great on like a dark corridor, but put them into a room with solid blue walls and you start to question what's gone wrong with the camera or the video transmitter.
Yeah, this whole process of look design and one level above that of film stock design or just abstract look design for footage that hasn't even been shot yet. You have to take cognizance of pixels that they haven't even been exposed yet, and they may be that blue or that green, you've got to deal with it all. That's why it's so challenging.
Of course, when a colorist is also looking at that stuff, they're looking at it on a good monitor, on a 12-bit signal with full quality material. You apply that on set in a compressed LUT on a video feed with Wi-Fi interference, and suddenly it might not work quite the way you expected it to.
Every time I've been on set, I literally feel like my ability to, my critical decision making seems to have been dropped to 25%, because it's standing around looking at a small monitor in a unfamiliar environment where the lighting's changing. So the ability to make critical creative choices, I have huge respect for the processes that go on set, because we're so lucky to, exactly as you said, big monitor, nice quiet environment, no disturbances, constant lighting.
It's also why I don't like to do dailies grading on set. It's too distracted. Your eye needs time to attune.
Right.
You need 15 minutes just for your eye to kind of get the right white balance after you've been outside on a bright set with a mixture of tungsten and HMIs pointing in your eyes.
Yeah.
So now you've got to come into a dark space and kind of tune into your work. And I find whenever I'm trying to do dailies type work on set, I end up with these massive drifts between when I start and finish, and then I have to go back to the start and rework the start.
Yeah.
And that's even with bias lights and good monitors, and it's not an efficient way to do it.
Yeah, no, they are ideal environments for it. And on set or in the back of a truck might be slightly better. The light might be controlled if you can don't have the sun going up and down outside. But not ideal.
Even just noise. Noise is incredibly hard to concentrate around, especially if you're trying to zone in and focus on one activity. Hence why we wait for lunch or wrap often.
Quickly rush off and do some grading. Most of the shows you work on now, they seem to have show LUTs, right? It seems to be quite a common trend. Obviously,
I would say that most of the time I'm working with a show LUT. Yeah, sometimes it's very simple.
And lots of versions, how you feel people working. They just have that one thing for everything and then would do color balance tweaks in the raw parameters, or is it several high, medium, and low contrast, interior, exterior, show LUTs, etc.?
I mean, it changes show to show, DP to DP, project requirement to project requirement. Again, The question is the showlight, is the DP carrying a showlight that's kind of become a part of their signature look? Some
Right.
people do that.
Yeah.
And you can pay a lot for a good showlight like that. And you can pay a lot for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, I've heard of people paying €10,000 for a showlight. And
Wow.
to be honest, I don't think that that's actually far off the mark. If I was to build a light for someone for a show where I was not the person working on it, I would really want to make sure there's absolutely no way that whoever was working with it could turn around later and go, oh, it's the LUT's fault that we're underexposed, or it's the LUT's fault that it looks like this. Like, there's a lot of responsibility you take on when you make a show light for someone else that another colorist is then expected to use further down the line as well.
Well, think of it like if you know the show lights of Law, which are the Roger Deakins made by Jay-Z and whoever, and then the Steve Yedlin self-designed show lights. You think of how much mystique those things carry. Sure, I could see that something that you could use for 5 years. Sure, 10,000. Why not?
Again, coming back to it in terms of you want me to take the responsibility of providing something like that. There's an element of like I've got to be able to argue that no, I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with the LUT, and like there's a price to putting yourself in the firing line, in a sense,
right?
As well, you've got to be able to own it as well.
It's creative choices; they're not factual choices, and you've got to know how to back them up, and it's got to be obviously suitable for the project. So that's it for now. To be continued on the next episode. In the second part of my interview with Richard Muller, we continue to talk about his experiences on various jobs like Dark, Tribes of Europa, 1899, and Wes Anderson commercials for Mont Blanc, and the film The Phoenician Scheme. We discuss LED wall calibration for film acquisition jobs, and the many aspects of the color pipeline that need to be considered. He has advice for people who are interested in becoming DITs and entering our industry, and I ask him all about his collaboration with various other departments in the film production process, in pre-production, on-set, and in post-production. We intensively discuss the cooperation between the cinematographer, the DIT, and the colorist when coming up with a look for a job. Thanks again for listening to the Color Mentor podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can leave comments on Patreon or Instagram. The Instagram handle is color.mentor. And remember to head over to the Color Mentor page on patreon.com and check out the goodies there. We'll see you next time.